Today we are in a little bit unusual setting. We had to do some adjustments in the house, so that's here we are. But we have our Old Testament reading for year C in LCMS. If you follow LCMS calendar, it's a reading for Trinity Sunday, and we have one of the most traditional readings or lectionary readings for this Sunday is Proverbs 8 1 through 4 and verses 22 and 31. So, but before we'll go into the text, I'll have some words, general remarks about the book of Proverbs. As you know, book of Proverbs is a part of the setting which is called books of wisdom or books of poetry. Our Bibles, most of Bibles that we use, follow Septuagint set of canon. So we have 5 books of Moses. Then we have historical books from Joshua to Ezra and Nehemiah, the whole history. And actually in the middle, historically, in the middle of this period, we have David, Solomon, part of wisdom, but it follows in the books. So the historical books are followed with books of poetry or the books of wisdom, which is Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. So we have 5 books of Moses. It's very interesting, actually. We have some historical books. We have 5 books of wisdom, and then we have prophetic books, starting with major prophets and then minor prophets, and then we have New Testament. So in the book of wisdom, it starts in chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel." But when we seriously consider the structure of the book as we have it, we can see that there are 7 main parts. And the parts are, so we have part number 1 goes from 1:1 to the end of chapter 9. So basically from 1 to 9. Part 2, it's from chapter 10, verse 1, goes into 22:16. 3, we have 22:17 to 24:22. Part 4 is 24:23 through verse 34, and 5 we have a new beginning at 25:1 to the end of chapter 30, and then 6 is chapter 30, and 7 is 31. And as you see, I made a mistake, so this is the end of 29:27. We know this because there are kind of like headings. For example, as I said, 1:1, the Proverbs of Solomon, king of David, king of Israel. And then 10:1 starts with the following phrase, the Proverbs of Solomon. And then in the middle of the second part of the book in 22:17, we have another interesting phrase, which is 22, incline your ear and hear the words of the wise. Okay, so here is another block that gives us, that leads us through the words of the wise. And then in 24:23 block 4 is, I'm sorry, kind of lost. These are the sayings of the wise. Okay, so we have few verses that goes through the sayings of the wise, and then chapter 25 starts with, these are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the man of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. So most likely we had some previous editions, and then it was brought together, and then chapters 30 and 31 kind of stay on its own. Chapter 30 starts with the words of Agur, son of Jacob, or Yakech, the oracle, and so on and so forth. And 31 starts with the words of King Lemuel, the oracle that his mother taught him. Okay, so it looks like we not all the words in this book belong to Solomon. Again, like the editorial insertion that these are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the man of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied, or the chapter 30, the 31, the Agur or Lemuel. But regardless of the earthly authorship, we know and believe and confess that behind this, any human wise man was the author, with capital A, the author himself. Though it is interesting to consider structure of the first and the last units. If we break them into, if we follow what's going on, we have three things in each of them. There is some kind of intro, so it's 1 through 7. There is a basic wisdom, so it's 1:8 through 7:27. And then here it's very interesting. We have two hymns about Lady Wisdom. So chapters 8 and 9. Interestingly enough, if we look at this block, we have another intro, so 31, 1 and 2, and then we have like basic wisdom, basic instruction, wisdom instructions. So verses 3 to 9, and then guess what? At the very end, we have 22 verses about excellent woman or excellent lady, excellent wife. Blessed wife. Let's do it this way, which is 10 to 31. In traditional Jewish houses, this passage, 22 verses, and it is important why it is 22 verses, is used for blessing of a wife of the house, where man stretches his arms and or hands, covers her and reciting the whole passage. Why it is important that it's 22 letters? It's not only 22 in number; it is alphabetical. In Hebrew alphabet, there is 22 letters, and it's Aleph, Bad, Gimel, Dalet, and so on and so forth. So this particular passage, 31, 10 through chapter 31, verses 10 through 31, is structured alphabetically. So the first line starts with Aleph, second line starts with Beth, third line starts with Gimel, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like an overall structure of the book of Proverbs. If we consider the richness of the book, and we need to understand some things about wisdom in general. So the wisdom comes with experience. So you have 5 books of Moses. We have historical books that tell us how people applied those and these set rules of the books of Moses. But when you apply them day after day, you see that sometimes books of Moses do not give you a precise answer. You need to know how to apply it in the very peculiar situations. For example, it's not in the Proverbs, but same Solomon. Remember, 2 ladies came to him and with some kind of strange vocation, let's put it this way, and both claimed that it was son of woman A and son of woman B. The same boy was their son, so one killed the other ones. So you know that story, the first book of Kings at the end of chapter 3. What rule from 5 books of Moses could be used to give an answer to this woman? So Solomon had to create a very, I would not be afraid to repeat this word, peculiar answer for this peculiar situation. And that's what wisdom. Sometimes it is not exactly following 5 books of Moses in a sense that it is not contradicting, in the sense that it just gives a wisdom based on experiencing, living through commandments and relationship with the Lord. So, as I said, when we look at life, the richness of life, and compare it with Proverbs, probably there is no theme that we cannot find in this book. But I will just suggest like 7 main ones, like most general, and the things that we can look for an answer. For example, it's a God and man, relationship of the divine and human beings, or wisdom, folly, and in this sense, the usage of the words, okay? Or the third one, the work on one side and the laziness on the other side. And with this together is the meaning or usage or implication of money. I mean, where the money come from? How do you get them, and how do you save them, and how do you use them? Or theme of friendship, or authority on one hand and rebellion on the other hand. Great theme of family, husband-wife relationship, father, son, children, they listen to my encouragements, and so on and so forth. And definitely the theme of life and death. It's definitely there. So with this in mind, with these preliminary phrases, let us go into our text. So as I said, chapter 8, as a wisdom, as a part of creation, as the one who was standing as a craftsman, as we'll find today in our passage, being a part of creation forces for heavens and earth. It is a traditional passage for Trinity Sunday. So, let's go. Does not wisdom call, and does not understanding raise her voice? Wisdom in Hebrew is chachma, and it's connected to the verb, which means on one hand to be or become wise, but it's also connected to the sense of skill or art. Be skillful. For example, in book of Exodus in 28 on one hand and 31, so Exodus 31:6, in ESV it says, "And behold, I have appointed with him a man, Aholiab, the son of Hishamash, from the tribe of Dan, and I gave him all able, and I have given to all able men ability that they may make that I have commanded you." The tent of meeting, the ark, and so on and so forth. This able man and ability, that's the same word as wisdom. So he gives him, the God gave them this wonderful, skillful, artistic passion for design. So it would not only be, they would not only be able to make it, but they would make it beautiful. It's a sense of beauty and art. On the other hand, if we'll go back to our text, does not understanding raise her voice? Tevuna, that comes from a verb to actually to separate, to distinguish, and that brings us back to an idea of creating something new by separation. Remember Genesis 1, very, very beginning, I said it many times and I want to repeat it, that if we want to understand the Bible, we need to spend lots of time in Genesis, especially in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Okay, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And so on and so forth. Then we will separate heavens in 2 parts. Then we will separate ground from water, and so on and so forth. So this idea of separation, you need to understand what to separate from what is good and what is not good, what is clean and what is unclean, what is healthy and what is unhealthy, and so on and so forth. So, but interestingly enough, in verse 1, as I said, we have 2, in a sense, main character. Wisdom on one hand and understanding on the other. Yet in the verse 2, on the heights beside the way at the crossroads, she takes her stand. This is a great example when we have unity and diversity. We have 2 characters that through the rest of the passage, they are kind of mingled together, yet we can see that some difference in between. But what is most important is to see that it is one united character that goes through. Okay, again, verse 3, example of wonderful and beautiful poetry. In ESV we'll find it. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries aloud. Okay, in Hebrew it is at the hands of the gates and at the lips, or at the front, at the surface of the face. So literally it's the same word as lips. You know, the same one as we find in Psalm 51. "O Lord, open up my lips, and my God will declare your glory." So that's the same thing, from the lips of town. And the town is very unique word. It's not a regular word for town. So this is just an example of this beautiful poetry that we have in Hebrew. It's wonderful to study Hebrew, so welcome. In verse 4, there is also things that are unique in this passage, and we need to kind of notice that. "To you, O man, I call, and my cry is to the children," or the sons of man. Technically it's the sons, but even with man, there is a regular word that kind of translates from singular into plural. Okay, so the man in Hebrew is ish, a man, and then plural is nashim. But in at least 2 instances in the Bible, here and in Isaiah 53, we have ishim. It is Hebrew, but it is a little bit different. It's more Phoenician than Hebrew, yet it is here. It's kind of like a very interesting dialectic thing, that this wonderful poetic insertion that we might want to pay attention. And again, by usage of this word, we have a great connection between the one that cries out and this wonderful of creation, being a partaker of creation, and this most amazing passage that we actually discussed a few weeks ago, Isaiah 53. You know, Isaiah 52, actually 13, that goes to the end of the chapter 53. Now we go into our main block, 22 to 31. It is very interesting to consider, let me erase this part, that it's gonna be messy now. Yes. Well, not as messy as I thought. Okay, so it is interesting to consider verses 22 to 31 as 2, 3, 4, along. As actually a sequence that in some very rough, tell you up front, very rough sense of 7 days of creation. Let's go there. These are the 22. Lord possesses me at the beginning of his work. Or actually, literally, is Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, at the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. There is one important thing to note here before we'll go into 24 and following. In verses 22 and 23, set up a stage for this it can be used as like an introductory phrase to explain the creative activities of the wisdom. The thing is, for whatever reason, unfortunately, as it's many times in Septuagint, the word, the verb, which is here as Lord possesseth me, or he had me by his side, in Septuagint was translated as created. So if you know anything about history of the church, you might have heard the name Arian, and Arian is actually has modern followers in the sense of Jehovah's Witnesses. They also claim some of his claims. For example, that Jesus is not second person of the Trinity. The second person of the Trinity is not as eternal, is not as full of glory as the Father. Second person of the Trinity, they do not use the term Trinity whatsoever, but second person was a first creation. Even though it was the before creation of heavens and the earth, yet it was the creation. Okay? And Arian, actually, when he claimed his truths, his statements, let's put it this way, he actually used this particular verse from Septuagint as a background of his theology. So be very careful. Sometimes it still floats around. But if we know Hebrew, as I said already today, it's good to know the original. It's good to go back to sources, the true sources. And the true source for what we consider Older Testament is the Hebrew text, and sometimes Aramaic text. So, Lord had me at the very beginning of his way, at the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at first before the earth. So one more time, before creation started, the one that we know from Genesis 1, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so before all of this started, there was wisdom. Now, let's see. In first part, 24a. When there was no depths, I was brought forth. And it's interesting that in the very first day, when we have this creation, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was found form without the form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the depth, okay? And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of water. So before any of that, I was there. So that's the day one. So when there is no depth, I was brought forth. And there is no springs found with water. And it's interesting, 24b tells us more explicitly of the sources of water being separated. There was kind of like a moisturized mix over the earth, and the earth was, I guess, sounds like that, it was more like a swamp. So what happened is we have some water pushed up, and the firmament was in between, and some water was down by the earth. Okay? And then the 25 and 26, we have day 3. Because it says, before the mountains had its shape, before the hills I was brought up, and the first part, and the 26, before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the earth. And we remember on day 3, what God happened, or what God did, what happened is, God separated soil, like the earth, the hardcore earth, from the waters. Okay, so we have some level of the ground raised up, and that's why we have mountains, hills. Plus, we also have fields, because on the third day, the fields were filled with plants and trees. Okay, and now we have verses 27 and 28. And what happened on 27 and 28? We have sun, moon, and stars put all across the sky and heavens, and that's what we have here. And when he established the heavens, I was there, and when he drew a circle on the face of the deep, and he made firm the sky above, and he established the fountains of deep. So the skies and heaven, this kind of parallel that goes between, might be seen as a remark toward toward day 4. And then day 5, as we know, in day 5 we have fish in the water, and we have birds that would fly across the sky. So 29. 29 has 3 lines, so lines A and B tell us when he assigned to sea its limits, and so that the waters might not transgress his command. But picking up from line C, 29C, to verse 30a, we have, when he marked out the foundations of earth. So on the 6th day, we are back to earth, and we fill the earth with animals, and that's when the humans are created. What do we have here? When he marked out the foundations of the earth, when I was beside him like a master worksman or craftsman, and that's kind of like an allusion to man. So what we see is, what we can think of is that creational paradigm that we have in Genesis 1 and 2 is a replica of what wisdom was about, what was planned from the very beginning. And it is important to notice that this is not the end. The end is actually starts with 30b and goes through verse 31. What do we have for Shabbat? For Shabbat we have day by day, okay, yom vayom. Day by day I was his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited word, and delighting in the children of man. So there is a sense of conclusion, the rejoicing. There's this wonderful joy of achievement, of completion. That's what we have after hard laboring, going through the week. We can, have a day of joy. Not necessarily that we do not have a days of joy in the middle of the week, but this is a special day of joy, rest, enjoying fellowship with our fellow believers, fellow members of our families, or fellow members of our spiritual families, the churches, and especially we can rejoice in the Lord. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And with these, there is one more important thing that I want to point out, is this wisdom can be seen as a personification of, as I said, second person of the Trinity. And it is not only a theme for Proverbs. Let me show you a couple places. For example, if we'll go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 23 and 24, where Paul kind of sets up his main goal for the preaching, why would he write this letter at all? He says, but we preach Messiah crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles, but to those who are called, both from Jews and both from Greeks, Christ, or Messiah, the power of God and the wisdom of God. So this Messiah is the wisdom of God. He is the one which is explained, depicted, this wonderful, with this wonderful examples of the beautiful poetry presented to us in Proverbs chapter 8. And following this, in 1 Corinthians 2:6, it's noteworthy to pay attention to. Yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart the secret and hidden wisdom of God. So we bring this secret, we bring this wisdom, because in reality, the people who go into the wisdom of God, they kind of become godlike. Not in the sense that they become divine, but they understand how world works in material sense, in psychological and emotional sense, in sociological sense, how creation is done. So this is the wisdom that we can get from God. There is one more important, I would say even more important passage on wisdom we can find in the book of letter to Colossians. Why it is more important? Because I believe that Colossians were written to the people who actually wanted to go into the wisdom of this world, into the Greek wisdom, and that's what he addresses in chapter 2. In chapter 2, verse 8, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit. And what's the opposite? What you can fight, actually, what means you can use to fight this philosophy and deceit of this world? And what he brings to is, here's Christ, chapter 1, verse 15. He is an image of invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Okay, he is a firstborn. He was by God's side from the very beginning, before heavens and earth. Before everything started, he was there. And chapter 2, verse 3, he says, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Remember, from the very beginning we started. There is wisdom and understanding. Wisdom and knowledge, they go together. One is discern, one is to separate, one is to make sense out of things, and another one is to make things beautiful. So I hope you will make sense out of this lesson, and hopefully this lesson will help you to beautify your life. Stay blessed.